This program contains sensitive language and content.
PRI, Public Radio International.
Remembering Slavery is made possible by major grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, dedicated to expanding American understanding of human experience and cultural heritage, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, with additional support from the Southern Humanities Media Fund and the Alabama Humanities Foundation.
We were slaves. We belonged to people.
See, the white folks would have church in the morning, then they'd let the colored people have church at their church in the evening.
You're a slave.
It was slave time. I can remember when the Yankees come through.
Well, now, to tell me to a year for the folk know they was free.
He said, the master commission with me. He quit praying and then he asked me, Lord, have mercy on the master. Lord, have mercy on the master. My soul with me, brotherhood.
If I thought that I'd ever be a slave again, I'd take a woman and just end it all right away. Because you're nothing but a dog. You're not a thing but a dog.
Smithsonian Productions, Remembering Slavery. Those who survived tell their stories. Is Tonia Stewart. When I was a little girl, about 5 or 6 years old, I used to sit on the garret, the front porch. In the Mississippi Delta, the front porch was called a garret, and listen to Papa Dallas. He was blind and had these ugly scars around his eyes. One day I asked Papa Dallas, what happened to his eyes? Well, daughter, he answered, when I was mighty young, just about your age, I used to steal away under a big oak tree, and I tried to learn my alphabets so that I could learn to read my Bible. But one day, the overseer caught me, and he dragged me out on the plantation, and he called out for all the field hands, and he turned to them and said, let this be a lesson to all of you darkies. You ain't got no right to learn to read. And then, daughter, he whooped me. And he whooped me. And he whooped me. And daughter, as if that wasn't enough, he turned round and burned my eyes out. At that instant, I began to cry. The tears were streaming down my cheeks, meeting under my chin. But he cautioned me. Don't you cry for me now, daughter. Now you listen to me. I want you to promise me one thing. Promise me that you's gonna pick up every book you can and you's gonna read it from cover to cover. You see, today, daughter, ain't nobody gonna whoop you or burn your eyes out 'cause you wanna learn to read. promise me that you're gonna go all the way through school as far as you can. And one more thing. I want you to promise me that you's gonna tell all the children my story. Papa Dallas survived slavery, and I kept my promise. I'm now a university professor, a PhD, and an actress. He and many others deserve to have their stories told. In the late 30s and early 40s, federal and private agencies sent interviewers across the South in an effort to document music and culture. Among those interviewed were African Americans like Papa Dallas, who had been born into slavery and lived through the Civil War. Many of the interviews were documented on paper. Some of the interviewers were able to record their voices. In this program, you will hear parts of these original recordings and dramatic readings of some of the written transcripts by actors Debbie Allen, Louis Gossett Jr., Esther Roll, James Earl Jones, Clifton Davis, and others. And now, former slaves tell you in their own words of their lives in bondage and what it was like to be a slave no more.
My name is Fountain Hughes. I was born in Charlottesville, Virginia. My grandfather belonged to Thomas Jefferson. My grandfather was 115 years old when he died. And now I am 101 years old.
The Fountain Hughes interview was recorded in 1949. At that time, he had been living in Baltimore for about 40 years.
You talk about how old you are, Uncle Fountain.
Well,
How far back do you remember?
well, I tell you, things come to me in spells, you know. I remember things more when I'm laying down than I do when I'm walking around.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in my boy days, boys live quite different from how they live now. I wore a dress like a woman until I'd be 10, 12, 13 years old.
So you wore a dress, Phil?
Yes, I didn't wear no pants because they didn't make boys' pants. Boys wore dresses. When the women were wearing the pants now, and the boys wearing the dresses.
Who did you work for, Uncle Fountain?
Who did I work for?
Yeah,
You mean when I was a slave?
yeah, when you were a slave, who did you work for?
Well, I belonged to Burnley's when I was a slave. My mother belonged to Burnley's. But we didn't know nothing. Didn't allow you to look at no book. And there were some freeborn colored people where they had a little education, but there were very few of them where we was. And we all had what you call, I might call it now, jail sentence. We just seemed to be in jail. Now I couldn't go from here across the street, or I couldn't go to nobody's house without I have a note or something from my master. And if I had that pass, that was what we call a pass. If I had that pass, I could go wherever he sent me, and I'd have to be back when I go wherever he sent me to. They'd give me another pass, and I'd bring that back so to show how long I'd been gone. We couldn't go and stay an hour or 2 hours or something like that. But they'd give me a note so that wouldn't nobody interfere with me and tell who I belonged to. And when I come back, why, I carry it to my master and give that to him. That'd be all right. But I couldn't just walk away like the people just now, you know. There's what you call, we were slaves. We belonged to people. They sell us like they sell horses and cows and hogs and all like that, have an auction bench. and they put you up on the bench and beat on you the same as you're beating on cattle, you know.
Was that in Charlotte that you were a slave? Was that in Charlotte or Charlottesville?
That in Charlottesville.
Charlottesville,
They
Virginia.
sell the women, sell the men. Oh, and then if you had any bad ones, they'd sell them to the nigger traders, what they call the nigger traders, and they ship them down south. They sell them down south. But otherwise, if you were a good person, they wouldn't sell you. But if you were bad, mean, they didn't want to beat you and knock you around, they sell you to the what they call a nigger trader. They'd have a regular. I was sailed every month, you know, at the courthouse. And then they'd sell you. And you get $200, $100, $500.
Robert Glenn's father did his best to keep his family intact. He tried to purchase his son with the money he had earned. The distinguished actor James Earl Jones reads his words.
I was a slave before and during the Civil War. I am 87 years old. I was born September 16th, 1850. I was born in Orange County, North Carolina, near Hillsborough. I belonged to a man named Bob Hall. He was a widower. He had 3 sons, Thomas, Nelson, and Lambert. He died when I was 8 years old, and I was put on the block and sold in Nelson Hall's yard by the son of Bob Hall. I saw my brother and sister sold on the same plantation. My mother belonged to the Halls, and father belonged to the Glenns. They sold me away from my father and mother, and I was carried to the state of Kentucky. I was bought by a Negro speculator by the name of Henry Long, who lived not far from Hurdley Mill in Person County. I was not allowed to tell my mother and father goodbye. I was bought and sold 3 times in one day. My father's time was hired out, and he knew a trade. He had, by working overtime, saved up a considerable amount of money. After the speculator Henry Long bought me, Mother went to father and pled with him to buy me from him and let the white folks hire me out. No slave could own a slave, so father got the consent and help of his owners to buy me, and they asked Long to put me on the block again. Long did so and named his price, but when he learned who had bid me off, he backed down. Later in the day, he put me on the block and named another price, much higher than the price formerly set. He was asked by the white folks to name his price for his bargain, and he did so. I was again put on the auction block, and father bought me in, putting up the cash. Long men flew into a rage, saying, "You think you are white, do you? Now just to show you are black, I will not let you have your son at any price." Father knew it was all off. Mother was frantic, but there was nothing they could do about it. They had to stand and see the speculator put me on his horse behind him and ride away without allowing either of them to tell me goodbye. I figure I was sold 3 times in one day. Mother was told on the threat of whooping not to make any outcry when I was carried away. He took me to his home, but on the way he stopped for refreshments at a plantation, and while he was eating and drinking, he put me into a room where 2 white women were spinning flax. I was given a seat across the room from where they were working. After I had sat there a while, wondering where I was going and thinking about mother and home, I went over to one of the women and asked, "Missus, when will I see my mother again?" She replied, "I don't know, child. Go and sit down." I went back to my seat, and as I did, both the women stopped spinning for a moment, looked at each other, and one of them remarked, "Almighty God, this slavery business is a horrible thing. Chances are this boy will never see his mother again." This remark nearly killed me as I began to fully realize my situation. Long, the Negro trader, soon came back, put me on his horse, and finished the trip to his home. He kept me at his home a while, and then traded me to a man named William Moore. Moore at this time was planning to move to Kentucky, which is what he did, taking me with him. Mother found out by the grapevine telegraph that I was going to be carried to Kentucky. She got permission and came to see me before they carried me off. When she started home, I was allowed to go part of the way with her, but they sent 2 Negro girls with us to ensure my return. We were allowed to talk privately, but while we were doing so, the 2 girls stood a short distance away and watched, as the master told them when they left that if I escaped, they would be whooped every day until I was caught. When the time of parting came and I had to turn back, I burst out crying loud. I was so weak from sorrow, I could not walk. The 2 girls who were with me took me by each arm and led me along, half carrying me.
Now, I remember seeing a heap of slave sales. They's all in chains and the speculators selling and buying them off. I also remember seeing a drove of slaves with nothing on but a rag betwixt the legs being galloped round before the buyers.
Josephine Smith was 94 when interviewed in Raleigh, North Carolina. Her written transcript is read by Miss Debbie Allen.
But about the worst thing I ever see, though, it was a woman at Lewisburg who'd been sold off from a 3-week-old baby. And she was being marched to New Orleans. She had walked till she was about give out and so weak enough to fall into the middle of the road. She was chained to 20 or 30 other slaves, and they stopped to rest in the shade of a big old oak tree while the speculators ate their dinner. Of course, slaves ain't had no dinner. And as I passed by, this woman begs me in God's name for a drink of water. I gives it to her, too. I ain't never been so sorry for nobody. It was the month of August, and the sun was bearing down hot on the slaves and the drivers, and when they leave the shade, they walk for a little piece, and this woman fall out. She dies right there at the side of the road, dead, just dead, right there. And right there they buries her, cussing, and they telling me about losing money on her. Oh, Lord Jesus, Lord have mercy.
Certain slaves were assigned to care for the children while the mothers worked. Laura Smalley describes this system on her plantation.
Just like we bring a whole lot of children, and put them down in one house, but somebody have to look over them and tend to them that way. There's a house full of little children. And if one act bad, they'd whip them too. And if the woman didn't tend to the children, they'd whip her too. To make her attend to the children, she wasn't doing them. And they'd whip her. And they had trays. And all of them, would get around that tray with spoons and eat something like rice or soup or something like that. And feed them before 12 o'clock. And all them children get around there and just eat out of them. And that old woman, she would tend to them. And they had certain times to come to them children. I think about this like a cow I said would go to the cave, they had certain time, the cow come to the cave at night. When they come at 10 o'clock, every day 10 o'clock to all them babies. Then what nurse, Then what didn't nurse, they didn't come to them at all, the old lady fed them. When that horn blowed, they blow the horn for their mothers, They just come just like cows, just one of them coming to the children.
In some cases, The parents of slaves were forced to helplessly witness their children being beaten by the masters. Former slave Caroline Hunter said in her interview, "During slavery, it seemed like your children belonged to everybody else but you. Many a day, my old mama has stood by and watched Massa beat her children till they bled and she couldn't open her mouth. They ain't beat us, but they used to strap my mama to a bench or a box and beat her with a wooden paddle while she was naked." Throughout the hardships, slave families who were able to stay together found strength in one another. Growing up a slave in Virginia, Frank Bell was blessed to be surrounded by parents, grandparents, and others who shared work as well as living quarters. Louis Gossett Jr. portrays Frank Bell.
John Fallon's had about 150 servants. He wasn't much on no special house servants, but everybody in the field he did, even the women. Growed mostly wheat on the plantation, and the men would scythe and cradle, while the women folks would rake and bind. Then us little children, boys and girls, would come along and stack. Used to work in family groups, we did. Now me and my 4 brothers never had no sisters. Used to follow my mom and dad. In that way, one could help the other when they got behind. All of us would pitch in and help Mama, who wasn't very strong. Because in that way, the man, what was doing the cradling, would always go no faster than the woman, who was most times his wife, could keep up. Old overseer on some plantations wouldn't let families work together. But Marse John Fallon's had a black foreman, what was my mother's brother, my uncle. Moses Bell was his name, and he always looked out for his kinfolk.
I was raised in the house with him, with the Felix McMillan. And they taught me mighty good. They teach me good.
Joe McDonald of Livingston, Alabama, spent his childhood in the big house with the white folks. The voice of Joe McDonald.
They said, I remember, said, Joe, I said, yes, sir. When we are dead and in heaven, they said, we want to raise you as an intelligent nigger. We want you to have good friends like we have got. So you'll never be scratched by good, rich, sensible white folks because they can tell who you are by your raising and your compliments. To show that you've been raised, he said, not by the colored, but by the white. I washed in iron. Some days I wash 100 pieces. Every morning I'd have 5 beds to make up, 5 fires to mix, and the children to dress, and churning to do. And after that, then I'd have some parts of the day. But I had all that to do every day.
We had twice a day, about sun up and at sundown.
Mr. John Sawyer as Bailey Cunningham.
All the work hands ate in the cabins, and all the children took their soup bowls to the big kitchen and got it full of cabbage soup. Then we was allowed to go to the table where the white folks ate and get the crumbs from the table.
No, if my master wanted to send me, he never said we couldn't get a horse and ride. No.
Fountain Hughes.
You'd be barefooted and cold. That didn't make no difference. You wasn't on a dog, some of them in them days. You wasn't treated as good as you treat dogs now.
On some plantations, beatings were rare or even forbidden. On others, they were unpredictable and depended upon the temperament of overseers and slaveholders. Laura Smalley talks about one of the worst beatings she saw.
Well, they take that old woman, poor old woman, carried in the preacher with you and whipped her. just tied a hand this way, around the peach of the tree. I remember that just as well, looked like to me, I can, and round the tree and whipped her. She couldn't do nothing but just kick her feet, just kick her feet. But it just had her clothes off down to her waist, Just didn't have her plumb naked, but they had her clothes down to her waist. And every now and then they'd whip her, and then snuff the pipe out on her, She'd snuff the pipe out on her. The embers in the pipe, and where you see the pipe smoking.
Blow them out on her? Good Lord, have mercy.
Blow them out on her.
Did she scream?
Yeah, I reckon she was. I reckon she did. But you see, we was glad to go out there where it was, because our old marshal was whoopers, and then Uncle Saul was whoopers. You see that an overseer, Uncle Saul. Her papa was overseer. But he had a whooper. He whooped her too. He sure did whoop her. Well, he whooped her so then at night they had to grease her back. Grease her back. I don't know what kind of grease they had, but they sure grease her back. At night, that way. We just grease her back. And so after they whooped her so long, whooped her then so long that way, they quit. They couldn't give her dinner. Late that evening, they gave her dinner. Late that night, she whooped so bad dinner, she didn't want to eat, If you put whoop you half a day, you didn't want to eat. You were tough or no.
Right.
Because a little child, you can whoop a little child now. He'd get mad, and don't want to eat nothing. So Uncle Saul, then he'd go whoop my mama. We had a brother, the oldest brother named Cal. And he was going to whoop my mother's boy, take water. Well, she was going to fight him. Yes, she was going to fight him. You see, one portion of the people belonged to Mr. Bethany, and one portion, belonged to his wife. Wife's a poodle, just like, you have a lot of niggas, and they give you a portion of them, and the white portion of them. Her people give you a heap of them, and then your people give you some. Well, that makes two parts. You got a part, and your wife got a part, or colored folks that way. And so Miss Adeline wouldn't let Uncle Saul whoop her. That was her side, That wasn't her nigga. She wouldn't let Uncle Saul whoop her that way. Well, then they called her a sassy nigga. Sassy called wouldn't let Uncle Saul whoop her. About the boy packing water. He'd pack water, all day. And if Uncle Saul, if they stayed late, when they got to the water where Uncle Saul was, the overseer was, he just pitch it out. Just pitch it out. As fast as the children could get to her. And he'd whoop them if they let him. Yes, he'd whoop them if they let him.
Whipping was not the only form of discipline practiced on plantations. Laura Smalley had a relative who was exempt from the lash, but punished in other ways.
Uncle Jesse, he wasn't born, he wasn't one of Mr. Bethany's niggas. He was a Pains. No, stepdad, yes, he was a Pains. He was a Pains. And he'd do anything, couldn't whip him. Couldn't whip him. And his head was red, he was red.
Well, where'd he come from?
Well, I think he come from like Louisiana, somewhere. Anyhow, he come somewhere. I couldn't exactly tell where he come from. Because my mom come from Mississippi. And when he back up, now where y'all ever see the corner fence?
Yeah, so when it's rail fence.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he back up in that, and they wouldn't whip him. You give him a stick and keep him off. Yes, sir. And he's a great big old man. He wouldn't let him whip him, you see. And the master wouldn't let him hurt him, because he wouldn't let the overseers know they whip you. The master make him whip him for the overseer didn't feed him. And they wouldn't let him whip him at all, wouldn't know. And the master tell him, rolling to kill him or something like that, don't hurt him. But don't kill him, but whip him. He wouldn't whip him, I tell you. No, he wouldn't whip him. No, sir, he wouldn't whip him.
How would they punish him then?
Give me a corn. Give me a corn. Just like, you give me a year of corn, and that'll be for my dinner or my breakfast. When you come home to dinner, he said to give me a year of corn. So he shut it off and plow along and eat it. Just plow along and eat it. Night comes, they give me a year of corn, and that's where they fed him, punching him, wouldn't give him nothing to eat. And say, look like he's moving along too slow, too fast with that, too good. too good with that, just give him corn. And his units, drink water and warm just the same. That's why they wouldn't give him none. Wouldn't give him nothing, but let him drink water, And he lived just the same. And he lived with Mama 32 years before he died. And he never did have a scar on those boys put on him.
You're listening to Remembering Slavery from Smithsonian Productions.
To learn more, visit our website at www.pri.org. Remembering Slavery is available on cassette with a companion book. For more information, call 800-233-4830. This is PRI, Public Radio International.